Hello, everyone. This is Maurice Fernandez. I'm presenting this video as a third installment about the planetary alignments for the year 2020. So we know this year is really extraordinary, intense, inflamed. So those of you who follow my work and who've been involved with astrology, perhaps uh, know that we've been talking about this for many years. I wrote an article back in 2015 about the need to prepare for this year. And even when we went through the elections in the United States in 2016, my thought was not just about, are we voting for someone to lead the country? That's one thing. But we're also voting for someone to lead the country in 2020, knowing ahead of time that this was going to be a pivotal and extremely intense year with a vulnerability of danger and destruction. And we see it, it is happening, unfortunately. It is happening the hard way. In astrology, even when we see difficult alignments, there's always the optimistic thought that there's a way to navigate that productively. Because in nature, and that includes the stars, nothing happens for no reason. It's not just random, nasty days. There's a higher purpose, there's a higher order. And it seems like the universe has conspired 2020 to have it all, to have all the possible challenges there could be. And we're only 5 months in. There are 7 months to go, and it's not letting up. It's not going to be, less intense. It's going to be different. We're going to speak about the change and shift of energies. But the thought is always, okay, it's powerful energy. Let's harness this wild horse and try to make something productive, something empowering. Instead of a breakdown, we can have a breakthrough. But unfortunately, we see how we are learning the hard way so far. I mean, we're going through a global crisis. People are getting sick. And we find every reason to get polarized. It seems like it's human nature to bring controversy, but it's also understandable that in times that are so intense and so much is at stake, and we feel so vulnerable that we argue about the best way out of this, the best way to handle this crisis. There's no precedent. We can't really compare it to any other time. Of course, there were pandemics before, and of course, there were earthquakes and fires before, but it seems like the circumstances, the way things are unfolding back to back and interlinked, especially in the United States, it being an election year, it obviously pushes people to extremely defensive behavior. So my purpose in speaking about this period of time is to try to see how we can best navigate those currents. Yes, these are rough waters. Yes, we don't expect security. Like, it's not about security this year. But sometimes embracing insecurity can be a positive adventure. And so, on the one hand, the purpose of this video is to try to say, if we understand what the universe is about and what this year, what this cycle is about, then we can make the best of it. But the other thing is that even if we have to go through difficulties, at least we can gain perspective and see that there is a higher reason, that it's not just random pain, and that we have something to learn from it. So bear with me. I'm going to try to be as accessible as possible. A quick word about my work. Those of you who are interested in this line of study and analysis, evolutionary astrology, I offer study programs. You can go to my website. I have this book, Neptune, and another book for beginners in astrology. Check it out. Now, this is a calendar that somebody put out sometime around March, and I made some adjustments to it. I added the astrology transits. And, the guy who did this, or the person who did that, started with the first 3 months and already was saying, like, what the hell is this year about? And this person is not an astrologer. So they realized 2020 is not, there's something about this year that's quite different, more intense. We all go through fires and crises and pandemics, but never to that degree of intensity, at least not in the recent year. And we know that a major factor that is behind the vulnerability and the potential for destruction and the division that we've been experiencing is the conjunction, the alignment between the planet Pluto and Saturn. Now, every time these two planets come together, it's a dramatic time. It's a year where it shatters the infrastructure. It demolishes empires. It redraws the maps. And so to one degree or another, we experience a collapse of sorts. If we go back, just a century ago, we go to the year 1914 with a Pluto-Saturn leading to the First World War. And then the opposition in 1931, that was just between the stock market collapse and the rise of Hitler in Germany, leading to what we know. And then 1947, after the war, the emergence of the Cold War, the East and West polarization during that Pluto-Saturn year. And more recently, 2001, the year 9/11, was also a Pluto-Saturn year. So we know that it's not a piece of cake, but the issue with 2020 is that it's not only a Pluto-Saturn year. So many very, very dramatic events, eclipses. And what we're going to talk about today, the Mars retrograde cycle that will synchronize with Pluto-Saturn, bringing the level of inflammation to very high intensity. And as I say, still, yes, these are rough waters, but there's a purpose. And that's what we're trying to do here, to work on this. So, this calendar seems really apocalyptic. It is. This year seems apocalyptic. And there may be destruction. We already see the destruction, but at the same time, it's not necessarily for the sake of suffering. There may be a higher reason behind it. So what is at stake? What's in front of us? We talked about the previous cycles. You can view the earlier videos on my YouTube channel. I encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel because that's what we do. Your subscription helps support our work, and it is also giving you updates on the new videos. So thanks for adding your name. But if on a practical level, you can view these videos, and now we look ahead from the month of June into October. I'm going to cover these 5 months because there's something starting now that is going to culminate around then. But like I said, it's not the end of it. It's not the end of it. The whole year until early January 2021 is going to be under tremendous stress. So coming up, the alignments that are coming up right now, I was pressed to release this video today because tomorrow is an important day, and I wanted you all to know about this. Tomorrow is actually a very, I would say, positive day, in the sense that the planet Venus, which is currently what we call retrograde, is going to conjunct the sun. It's going to come together with the sun. And in astrology, Venus and the sun both represent the heart center, generosity and devotion. And the interesting thing is that Venus meets the sun either when it's retrograde or direct, and it forms each time a 5-pointed star. And in the space of 8 years, it forms 2 of these 5-pointed stars. And it's a beautiful pattern that also brings some kind of harmonic resonance. I'm going to show it to you. But what I want to say is that in this intensity, there's actually a portal here tomorrow, June 3rd, where there can be an understanding, a resolution. And because it's in the sign of Gemini, it's very important for our times, because Gemini is about building bridges. It's about understanding other cultures. It's about curiosity about other people's way of life. And if we bring the heart center there, Gemini is about opening your mind. This can bring more understanding and tolerance and peace in this massive protest that is unraveling now in the United States to fight racism and this extremely tragic and despicable event of police brutality against George Floyd. The anger is understandable, and the need for change is just, I won't say timely, because it should have happened 4 decades ago. It should have happened in the civil rights movement, that there's no more discrimination against minorities and people of color. And we keep repeating this insanity. So now with Venus and Sun in the sign of Gemini, perhaps this is an opportunity for greater understanding and for the violence to subside, and to be able to bring a change in a non-violent way. We know that the violence is also incited by forced, what we call manipulated events, where people vandalize shops where the protesters are coming, just to put the blame on them. We've seen videos, unfortunately, that confirm these theories. And as we speak about June 3rd, excuse me, and this Venus star point, right after we are into a lunar eclipse. Now, this lunar eclipse is going to be a partial eclipse. It's not happening close to the nodes, so it's not going to cover astronomically, it's not going to cover completely the surface of the moon. But the way it is configured at 15 degrees Gemini, Sagittarius, it will square the planet Mars exactly at 15 Pisces. So there's a big, big, big event on that June 5th eclipse. Right after Mars squares the sun, and for that whole week, we're going to have a Mars-Neptune conjunction in Pisces, square the sun in Gemini. Now, these energy, basically, I'm just listing the points here, but briefly talking about the fact that this brings, a great deal of unexpected and out of control energy. In the illustration for June, there's this huge tsunami, and Pisces, Mars in Pisces relates to water. So this sense of tsunami is not just literal. It's also the way we feel. We're overwhelmed by emotions. The waters are drowning us. And yet, it is a period of chaos. And there's something that can be very constructive about chaos. Let's again understand how to navigate this. On June 21st, there's a total eclipse. That's going to be a very, very tight eclipse close to the nodes on the solstice point. So that's a cardinal point. It's like a portal. It's an entry point. And when the eclipse occurs on that degree, it really brings far-reaching changes. It can flip things over. It can take leaders down, and it can elevate us, people, leaders, to completely new positions. So it's a time of tables turning. Then soon after that eclipse, Mars, the planet Mars, moves from Pisces to the cardinal sign of Aries. But as it does that, it starts a whole new cycle. And Mars is going to stay in the sign of Aries more than 6 months. Usually Mars stays 2 months in a sign, but about every 2 years it retrogrades. So where the sign that it retrogrades in is the sign that it's going to stay longer in. And this time it will retrograde completely in the sign of Aries and therefore stay there. Go forward, then back, then forward again. And as it does that, it synchronizes with other cycles. The peak of the retrograde period will be in October, just before the US elections. So let's look at these dates. The Venus pattern tomorrow, June 3rd. As you see, Venus forms in the sky this dance with the sun. And as in the process of 8 years, it completes this 5-pointed star or 5-petal flower. And this is one of the petals. This is one of these pillars of this star. Because it's in Gemini, as I said, it has to do with greater understanding, tolerance of differences, acceptance of diversity, communication between people who come from different backgrounds. The thing that poses a challenge is that Mars is in the sign of Pisces, and where my cursor is at the top there of the chart, with that planet Neptune, and it squares Venus. So there are 2 issues here. Mars in Pisces relates to waters. It relates to the wild elements, to anything that is out of control. You know, I wrote that book about Neptune and Pisces. So if you want to better understand that, you can explore that book. But in a nutshell, Pisces and Neptune represent everything that is beyond our understanding, beyond the scope of our control. So in a positive way, it means that we are going with the flow, accepting to surrender, and trusting that there is sense in this universe, that if we're not in control, then something else is, that it's not just random. But it can create a sense of disorientation, a sense of being overwhelmed. Now, one of the great risks of Mars in Pisces, and I won't get into too much how, but just trust me, it does affect our immune system. So it's very likely that in the course of the month of June, there is going to be, you know, a second wave of contamination to one degree or another, because we see all, you know, all these elements lining up to dissolve our defenses, dissolve our boundaries. And we predicted that people are going to go back, you know, to intermingle in as the nodes move to Gemini. But it doesn't mean the crisis is over. The health crisis is not necessarily over. We also see the asteroid, this thing on the north node is the asteroid Hygeia, which is the asteroid that relates to health. And it's right on the north node now, you know, graphic. And it's in the sign of Gemini. And the sign of Gemini has to do with transportation, communication, and lungs, air. So is it a surprise that both the COVID crisis and the events around George Floyd have to do with breathing? I cannot breathe. You know, we see patients in hospitals on ventilators because they cannot breathe. And then we see this person being, you know, aggressed by a policeman, putting his knee on his neck and choking him, almost like a symbolism of what humanity is going through, being oppressed, not being able to breathe. So there's something from the universe, you know, there's some kind of message about breath. And breath is very much associated with rhythm, with being in sequence. You know, the breath is something very rhythmical. It's like a dance. And when you're off beat and you're out of sync, then you're out of breath. Breath and lungs also have to do with grief in Chinese medicine. So there's something about, you know, a collective grief. But if we look at it astrologically, you know, it definitely shows a sense that we are overwhelmed. We are overwhelmed by our sensory experiences. We're overwhelmed by, you know, high expectations and by the destruction of nature. It seems like it's not on the agenda anymore because we're coping with immediate crisis. But let me remind you, the Amazon was burning, Australia was burning. You know, are the temperatures and wildlife and deforestation and the excessive exploitation, blind exploitation of nature is part of this. I know there are many theories that whatever happened in Wuhan that led to the virus is not necessarily natural. But I do want to reiterate the natural message and the natural crisis that wildlife and nature is in crisis. And because of this destruction of nature, the immune system on a collective base level is breaking down. So that's perhaps also why we're all running out of air and out of breath. The North Node in Gemini is about restoring connections. It's about listening and stop talking, right? Don't be a know-it-all. Just chill out and reach out and try to understand other people's point of view. So tomorrow, during this Venus portal, I would recommend really that you have your own ritual around that. For your own personal sake, for your own life, wherever you need to bring peace, love, harmony, and understanding, but also project it collectively. Bring the world together. You know, our leaders are doing everything to divide us. Not to mention fake news, you know, putting in messages that are purposefully confuse us, which is another one of these Gemini manipulation. The shadow side of Gemini Sagittarius is misinformation. So remember that message of peace. And tomorrow is the time to meditate on that, if not every day. So I want to show you this 5-pointed star pattern. You know, it's not necessarily for this year only, but it gives you an idea. So we're right here on point 1, the green, and that's June 3rd, 2020. The next one is going to be at, the next one is going to be in Capricorn on January 8, 2022. And then August 13, 2023. And then March 22, 2025. And October 23, 2026. And back to Gemini in 2028. 8-year cycle. So that's how it keeps moving through the astrology wheel and in the cosmos. There's a parallel star, which is going to start on March 21st at the same point in Aries, to Libra, to Gemini, to Capricorn, to Leo. So these 5-pointed stars keep happening in the same sign over and over, each time with a 2-degree difference. And the green star is the retrograde Venus, and the dates in red, orange, are the exterior Venus, when Venus is direct and conjunct the sun. So pay attention to this. You know, there's a very important book by Ariel Gutman about the Venus cycle. You can check it out. So right after that, the eclipse, the lunar eclipse. Now you see here, the moon is 15 degrees Sagittarius, opposing the sun at 15 degrees Gemini, which is normal for an eclipse. It's always a full moon, the sun opposing the moon. That's normal. But this time, Mars is at 15 Pisces. So it's intersecting with that eclipse. And we talked about Mars. It has to do with something that is out of control, something that is beyond our mind. And as it moves to square the eclipse, it also is close to that planet Neptune, naturally associated with the sign of Pisces. So what happens with Mars in Pisces is that we can feel helpless, we can feel powerless. But on the other hand, it also gives us a sense that we're not just doing this for ourselves. Pisces is a very unifying sign at its core. So as it squares the Gemini Sagittarius eclipse, it brings an element of, on the one hand, victimization, but also an element of, we're in this together. We're in the same boat. And if I suffer, I also empathize with your suffering. This is a time where there could be unexpected events, both, socially, if the racial tension, it can lead to some kind of climax, especially if they start using police force. And Trump ordered to use a tougher hand on protesters. So we see with this eclipse, it's not going to go away just because it's not convenient. And Trump has a huge issue handling chaos. He loses his own bearings. So we'll see what happens, but it could be, again, a situation that is quite unstable and that can lead to more accusation. If it's negatively expressed, it can lead to more victimizations and to things really getting out of control. But in a positive way, which is what we want to focus on, it can dissolve our differences. It can basically make us remember we're all part of the same tribe. So my sense is that it's going to be a mix of both. The combination of the Venus star 2 days before and this one, you're going to have extraordinary gesture of people coming together from opposite parties, people laying down the arms and coming together. But it can also be a time, like I said, where people feel so disempowered, so helpless, that they end up, losing it. This is a configuration that can lead to a mental breakdown, to a feeling that I'm disoriented. On other levels, these are also times, from June 5 to June 15-ish, it's a time that is quite vulnerable to natural disasters, including the pandemic, resurfacing more aggressively to, I don't know if everywhere, but at least in some places. So we still need to be very careful. If you know your astrology chart and you have planets around the middle degrees of mutable signs, which would amount to being born early June, early September, early December, and early March, you are more involved in this process of both building the breaches, but also this feeling of potentially being overwhelmed. So just remember, this is a time to ride that wave. Don't try to control it. It's going to take you somewhere. You don't have security. You don't have, insight into the final destination. You can only see, a short distance ahead, but you have to trust the process. That's what, these months of June are about. Another word on eclipses, when we speak about eclipses, we also speak about divine intervention. It's as though the gates open, higher consciousness, and there's something larger than us that comes in and reshuffles everything and changes, turns the tables, and we're we're just looking and how to put it, trying to figure out what's going on. So change can happen very rapidly and very radically. Things can completely shift from 90-degree direction in a short time. That's both personally in our lives, but also collectively. And we're going to speak about how that affects also countries and leaders. But, be careful on the one hand, but on the other hand, do reach out. Now, if you need to start new projects, if you need to re-engage, this is not the time. This is really a time to kind of float, to navigate things more through improvisation, not foreplan. I'm going to give you more indications about when you should really move forward. For now, this energy is encouraging you to wait and see, but also to tune in rather than engage. So when we speak about divine intervention, like I said, we may see many, new people showing up in our lives, or people being removed from our lives, whether they leave, whether they get a new contract somewhere else, whether they break up with us, whether we lose our jobs, or whether we get, an unexpected bonus. That's what happened during eclipses. It's almost like, what is this tide going to bring? It's stronger than me. I'm just here to pay attention, to see what's going up. And then when the eclipses close, the gates are closing, then you have time to think, what did I just go through? What did just happen there? So interestingly, this eclipse, we can sometimes see astrologically how it affects the world map. And we see that it affects this this area of the world, Pakistan and India, as well as the west coast of Mexico and south, I won't say Midwest, western states of the United States and Canada, Tokyo and Japan, and then West Africa, Spain and France, and a part of Scandinavia. So where you see these lines going, that's where the eclipse is angular. It doesn't mean that these are necessarily going to be the place where most events happen, but maybe there's a higher probability. So the next eclipse is happening on June 21st. And that's a powerful eclipse because it happens on the solstice. The solstice is a cardinal point. It's a seasonal point. It's an ignition point. So we say eclipse, gates of heaven open. When and where? Exactly on that starting point of the season. So it sets the tone for all of us and for a long period of time is super important. Now, we're going to see, because the gates are open, this is really a time where many souls really decide to leave. It's just the way it is. It's a natural cycle, a cycle of departure and arrival. People suddenly getting pregnant, and people, whether they were expecting it or not, people departing. But those of us who are just here, and knock on wood, we all hope we have many more years and healthy years ahead. But this can be a time where changes occur in our own lives. Pay attention again. What is happening in your chart? Where is that degree 0 Cancer? What house? So those of you who don't know astrology, I encourage you, to explore this a little deeper. Once again, I have this book for beginners, Astrology and the Evolution of Consciousness. You can learn about the signs, you can learn about the houses, and understand this vocabulary a little better. It happens in the sign of Cancer, which is a maternal sign. It's a feminine sign. So there is possibly a development around women, mothers, becoming a mother. Also about our homes, about our residence. This is also a time, as I said, where things can change politically very, very rapidly. Whether it escalates to difficulties or whether, like I said, the tables are turning and whoever was on top is now at the bottom. So if we look at some people affected during this eclipse, interestingly, Prince William really comes to mind, because guess what? He is born himself on the solstice, on an eclipse on the solstice. This is what we call a metonic cycle. Every 19 years, the same eclipse returns at the same degree exactly. So William is 38. He's going to turn 38 on June 21st, and he's going to re-experience the same eclipse of his birth. It's a big deal. You can expect, as we've already seen with the British monarchy, I wrote about that. It's published that, 2019 and 2020 and 21 are going to be radical for the British monarchy. And we already see that. We see, the whole split with Harry and Meghan. We see so many, changes in the structure, and it's not over. So there could be a departure also in the monarchy. There could be, I don't know if it's the grandfather Philip transitioning or, an elder leaving, but it can also be some kind of change in his own status, in his own life and relationship. So we can expect, not necessarily on the very day of the eclipse, because the very day the gates are open, the message comes down, everything is reshuffled, and then we may realize only after the fact that there was, that something has changed. So pay attention to what is happening. Pay attention to what is happening in his relationships, in his life as a monarch. Maybe he's going to, get another promotion Interestingly, Elizabeth Warren is also born on the solstice with a sun at 0 Cancer. And we know on the one hand that she's out of the Democratic race, but we also know that Biden is looking for a female vice president. And quite frankly, she would be a good choice because we see that her chart is very strongly activated for these elections. So the eclipse on her sun, and later this year, the Saturn Jupiter on her own Jupiter, do promise that she can be someone who can pull it off, who can rise to prominence this year. So I don't know. We'll see. I have no clue personally. I'm just reading the signs and interpreting what I see. Another person really affected, this is the president of China, who is himself a Gemini, born the same day as Donald Trump. You know, they really conspired to do that together, the twin brothers. So it's very interesting to see how these two nations, you know, are battling, whether it was the tariff war or whether it was the coronavirus between China and accusation between China and the United States. And the two leaders are born on the same day, just a day apart, not the same year. And in the sign of brother, you know, of Gemini, which is the sign of two of the brothers of the sibling. So they're like, you know, both evil twins, I guess. But it's interesting that both Donald Trump and him are going to be heavily affected by the Mars-Neptune transit and the eclipse. For him, the eclipse is right on his Mars. So we can expect trouble for Chinese leadership. Hopefully not translating into violence with Hong Kong. But we see it's both a personal crisis for him, you know, maybe a loss in his family, maybe a change in his personal circumstances, but it could also be political, some kind of adversity, some kind of charge. Now, we do need to pray that whatever is happening between the United States and China stays verbal and doesn't escalate to more nasty stuff, because it could. So we need to be in a really powerful place of beaming positive energy to these guys and trying to distract them from their own demons. So Xi Jinping is going to have the eclipse on his Mars, and then Mars in Aries activating that a few days later. He's going to be angry about something. He's going to want to react to something. And maybe the public won't know anything about it. Maybe, you know, he's going to be angry at his wife. Who knows? I'm just showing the signs. I'm just showing the symbols. Let's pay attention. We also see Uranus on his Venus, which has to do with the need to really find solution for the economic crisis that China is experiencing. So Uranus brings innovation, brings new ideas, and a need to accelerate and modernize the economy. We see that China, through him, is preparing to upgrade their game. Interestingly, another person born on a solstice, but the opposite solstice, he's born on the December 21st solstice, which means that his sun and Mercury is exactly opposite the current eclipse. So he's on the spot as well. Emmanuel Macron, French president, is on the eye of the storm, the eye of the eclipse, just the same as our fellows here. So it can be a tremendous opportunity for him. We see that it's happening on his Jupiter, opposing Sagittarius sun. So Jupiter is the ruler of his sun. Let's wish him well and hope it's not some kind of health crisis. But it could also be that France, faces some adversities and challenges and unexpected circumstances, not only because of the eclipse, but because Mars squares everything, and it's going to square his sun. So we see, Macron also in some kind of, damage control. On the one hand, opportunity, and on the other hand, chaos. Edward Snowden, born on the solstice, also on the spot. We'll see, what happens with him. But there could be some kind of, some kind of release, whether he's going to be, come out to the public again, whether, there's going to be some kind of development with his case. Maybe he's going to have a new contract. It's accelerated development. With eclipses, everything goes faster and faster. And like I said, things happen to you, things change rapidly, and you only figure it out, as you go. Now, right after the eclipse, about a week later, as I said, Mars moves on the 27th of June to the sign of Aries, and it's going to stay there until January 2021. So we have about 6 months of a Mars in Aries transit. However, look at this chart. Just at the very, very end of Pisces, just as it's about to move into Aries, Mars is in 29, the very end degree of the zodiac, opposing the moon in Virgo, 29 Virgo, and then squaring the nodes at 29 Sagittarius. So it's what we call in astrology a mutable cross. And that is, it's just a moment. It's going to be like that for maybe half a day, not just a moment, but half a day that this alignment is locking in. And then everything shifts again. Mars changes sign, moons changes sign, the forces are dispersed. So that ingress of Mars in Aries is coming in with a bang. I told you that already when Mars moved into Capricorn, early March, end of February, that there's going to be a bang. And that's when the pandemic exploded. This is another bang. And we have to be careful about this bang. On a personal level, it can be a release. When you tell yourself, I'm doing it, I'm going for it, I'm not waiting anymore. I am not postponing my destiny. So in a positive way, this can be, going for something. In a negative scenario, it's extremely defensive, but defensive in a way that's also helpless. So it's like a wounded animal that becomes aggressive because they don't know who's the enemy, who's the friend anymore. It becomes a complete chaos. And we, if we find ourselves in a situation where we lose our north, it's important to remember we'll regain it. Don't sink into any kind of despair. It's momentary. Just breathe. Do breathe deeper into this. In a positive way, what I would encourage you to do is to use this as a moment of meditation. This perfect alignment at the 29 degree also means that if you talk to the stars, that if you understand these energies, perhaps you can transmute them. Perhaps you'll get a clue of how to lead this forward. So what to meditate on? Meditate on unification. Meditate on healing. It's happening in the signs of Pisces and Virgo, which have to do with disease and healing. We know that this pandemic is not over. Look at this symbol. Immune system, Mars in Pisces, the immune system. Gemini, Sag, spread it. Distribution of viruses. It could also be, like we said, volatile and chaotic reaction. So how to use this productively? This is a time, first of all, like we said, to bring healing to your life, to protect yourself, to protect your loved ones, but to also invoke larger forces for support, for healing. And it is also a time that is the threshold between waiting, going with what is, versus engaging, changing gears. So as Mars is in Pisces, you're in neutral mode. You are in receptive mode. The moment it moves into Aries, you're in action mode. And it's time for you now to make the decisions, to take your destiny into your hands. And that happens on that transition. In astrology, Mars in Aries is like a birth. So think about a baby is passive in the womb and is just there receiving from the mother. And then comes the time, I need to get out of here. I need to become who I'm meant to become. And that means push out. That means scream myself out. And that also means cut the umbilical cord. So this is for us collectively, the labor of birth. For our new chapter in our life, we're starting from that date a completely new season in our own development. That's birth. So sometimes it can be, hard labor, but then there is a breakthrough. And then we're moving into Mars in Aries season. So it's a completely different climate. We can, towards the end of the month of June, and all the way into early January 2021, is this mighty force of Mars. So just going back to our, where is that? To our date. June is packed with really dramatic events. And, we can only speculate what form it's going to take. Is it going to be the virus again? Is it going to be protests? There's a vulnerability to natural disasters, especially involving water, but not only. And the importance also of volatility. To me, as we move into the second half of the year, I want to pay the most attention to political conflicts, because that's where the larger, believe it or not, that's where the real danger is. If this situation, which is, tremendous insecurity, is not handled properly, the division, the adversity can ignite fires between us. And that's the danger that we have to really, really prevent. And as I said, on the one hand, Mars in Aries is a time where we need to take charge of our destiny, but it's also a time where anger can become very externalized. Mars in Aries is not retrograde frequently. I said earlier, Mars retrogrades in Aries, Mars retrogrades every 2 years. But the last time it actually retrograded in the sign of Aries was only in 1988 or 87, 88. So, be more than 30 years ago. Before that, it was in the 1940s. So Mars is in its own sign of Aries, which, is naturally a sign of defense, and it's a sign of creativity. But if we want to really summarize what Mars in Aries message is, number one, reinvent yourself. Number two, stand up for yourself. And number three, take charge of your destiny. Number four, save yourself. Nobody else will save you. So it's about really being autonomous, and it's about understanding that if you don't do it, nobody will. But it can also be very reactive and volatile. It's very fiery. We all need that fire in our belly to get things done. And that's Mars in Aries, get things done. And I'm going back to my first point. Many people in this next phase between July and October and so forth are going to be in transition in their lives. Obviously, there's a precedent for that. Everything's in shambles. So many people will need to start anew. And many people come to me for readings. And it's quite noticeable that during this time, while people were in retreat and were in lockdown, they had the time to think about what's next in their lives. And many people want to change. They don't want to go back to work the way it was. They want to do something different. There's a feeling that this is now the time. We can't postpone our destiny. We can't just win more time and try to play it safe. 2020 is not about playing safe. Now, that doesn't mean you have to spend all your money, but it is a time where you're planting new seeds. You're birthing something new. So be creative. Even if you have a business, I assume, I can anticipate that this is a time where you're going to have to do things differently. Maybe you're going to not work anymore with the same people, change partners, different alliances, different contracts, different direction. That is what is happening from July on. And it's instigated by the eclipses in June. So the eclipses is that, if we use an imagery, it's a time of complete chaos and you don't really see what's going on. There is divine intervention. Something larger than ourselves is kind of moving things in our lives. And then from July on, you're kind of riding that new wave. So that birthing process is happening. You are out of that womb. You're out of the process is done. And typically Mars in Aries is about, just like the baby fighting its way out, learning to stand up, learning, to get what it wants in order to preserve itself and in order to win another day. That's Mars. Every day is a victory. Every day needs, a tremendous amount of strength. But it's also a celebration because you are victorious. So look again what sign, what house, what part of your chart is activated by this Mars, and where you will probably take that reinvention. In a very positive way, it can feel like you'll have the courage to do things that you've been waiting for. You wanted to start your own business. You wanted to, quit the corporate job and become an artist. You want to become an astrologer. You want to leave the city and move to another place. This is the time where you uproot, where you sever connection, and when you are basically redrawing your map and reconfiguring your life. So on the one hand, it's a lot of energy, just like when you're moving houses, it takes a lot of time to pack and unpack. It's a bit of what's happening during that time. But it's exciting in the sense that you feel like you're the entrepreneur of your life and you feel motivated, driven. There's fire in your belly. So the whole period of July and August is a time where all this is in action, and you're going to get ideas, and you're going to want to do this and want to do that and quit that. So expect breakups, expect changes, expect relocation, change of jobs. And in that sense, there could also be battles and adversity, because sometimes in order for you to reclaim your life, you have to say stop to abuse. The anger that's in Mars is also a reason to take action. So when someone annoys you and you decide, I don't want to spend more time with you, you're taking charge of your destiny. You are making that necessary change. So just be prepared and don't be afraid to take action. It's called upon. Now, moving into the end of August, what happens is that this Mars starts going retrograde early September, and it's going to form a square to the big giants, Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter. The big giants that started this year and created a complete reconfiguration of the system. It's big because alone Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter are already redefining leadership. It's in sign of Capricorn. and they represent the need to bring leaders accountable. It's called, a karmic purging of sorts. What we've been exposed during the pandemic is a lot of doubt and a lot of insecurity about misuse of power. Are the authorities overly controlling, wanting, to control the pandemic and invading privacy rights through monitoring? So there's a tremendous need to to hold leaders accountable and to confront injustice, to confront corruption. At the same time, we need reliable leadership. And this is what this year is about. It's a deconstruction in order to hopefully, bring accountability and hopefully restore positive leadership at the end of this journey. Now, these are the three giants. They are going to square that individualistic Mars that represents that need to take charge, to change, to redefine our destiny. We can expect extreme tension between individual versus system. That's what I mean by many people leaving the corporate job. Like, you don't want to be part of a big system anymore. It's time where you want to individualize and you want to reclaim your own life, and you're not going to compromise anymore. So that Mars in Aries is no compromise, going for it. However, it will require destroying walls. The wall is Saturn. Mars is the fight. So in your own life, you may need to fight an authority. You may need to break a wall. You may need to climb a mountain in order to reach to your promised land, to your promised destiny. It's going to be a rite of passage. It's not going to be a free ride. So it's this initiation is a test of strength. And some of us will fail. We're going to try to climb that mountain and we won't make it. And, some of us may need to retreat. But in many cases, it's going to make us stronger and we are going to prevail. So once again, there may be some kind of symbolic need to take over the existing leader. It may be that you are becoming a new leader. You're leaving the old leader behind and you're becoming something else. It may be that you will need to fight your boss or separate from your boss. So conflict with authorities and conflict between the old self and the new self. Like we say, it's all for a good reason. It's a lot of sweat and it is a rite of passage. You will need to prove that you're eligible, that you deserve the credibility, that you deserve what you're fighting for. On a collective level, unfortunately, this is a configuration that is extremely volatile. It can lead to both physical earthquakes, the earth shaking, and natural disasters. But I believe the greater danger is war. And that is what we really need to consciously engage to prevent. Because when there's tremendous financial insecurity, when there is lingering chaos, that's when we become very defensive. And that's when, the fire is easily ignited. And all the planets are lining up to tell us there's something very militaristic about these alignments. And it may be regional conflicts and power struggles. It may be global. So, if we want to influence that collectively, we need to keep exposing the truth. We need to keep protesting any kind of abuse of power and, stand up for the truth. But that is, of course, the worst case scenario. I want to bring it up because we need to face the probabilities. But it doesn't mean it has to be. So this period of Mars retrograde and the squares begins end of August, mid to end of August, and then peaks around October, mid-October, around the degrees 21, 25 cardinal, when Mars retrogrades opposes the Sun. That is the peak of the retrograde period. And it happens to be that it also squares Pluto, Saturn. Now, I chose that date because it's an exact opposition, 21, 21, Mars, Sun. It means that the Earth is right in the middle. And it's a couple of days ahead of a new moon. So around the 15th, the moon will join the Sun around 23 Libra, oppose Mars, square Saturn. You're going to have a new moon involved in this angry, volatile, life-changing configuration. Honestly, it's a time where we need to be super careful, both on a physical level, be careful of injuries. Don't go skiing around that time. You could break a bone. But it also is a time where our identity crisis may be at its peak, when we really will ask ourselves the question, what do I want to be? What is my next step in my life? You will be at a crossroad, just like you're looking here at this cross. It's a crossroad. So you can anticipate that many people, especially if you have planets around the 20-degree cardinal, you will go through a reinvention of yourself, a new future. And it is going to be a time where you say, no more of this, and now I'm going to do that. So it's kind of a climax for decisions and reorientation. It can also be a time where you, like I said earlier, you can leave your job, leave your relationship, leave your town, and plant new seeds. So it's not a time for security. It's not a time to play it safe. Do it. Risk it. Go for the higher calling. Open your heart. And if you do that, then this energy can be tremendously helpful because it catapults you, really fast forward. It's like that wild animal. It is a wild animal. And if you know how to communicate with that wild animal, it's a force that can serve you very benevolently. But if you're trying to fight it, it's going to bite and you're going to get hurt. So that's the height of the battle, basically. And if we take that politically, We have to watch what's going on between China and the United States. We have to watch what's going on with Russia. You know, it's right before the elections. And I will tell you, because so much is happening on a planetary level, I would not be surprised if elections are postponed. And if there's some kind of change that will lead to a change of circumstances, it's possible. You know, if there is ever a year where such a thing could happen, it's this year. Now, if things do continue as planned, we see that the battle is raging actually prior to the election. You know, that month of October, I would not be surprised to see protesters and to see, you know, fierce debate, hopefully not physical, but there's adversity out in the air. Now, you know, it's very interesting that Bernie Sanders is out of the picture. We know he's not running for president. He's probably not going to be the vice president either. But he's born in 1941, around, you know, the previous Mars retrograde in Aries. So we mentioned how this is a very rare retrograde, and 1988 and 1941, and so he's going to have a return of that. Like the cycle is returning to his natal position around that time in October at that peak degree. Remember, 21, and the new moon is going to be 23 degrees Libra. Where is his Mars moon? 23. His Venus, 22. So either he's going to be, you know, in the battlefield and he's going to fight with Biden on an election campaign, but this looks more, you know, this is not just an election campaign. Like something is alight. We have to really pray for his health, because this intensity of energy can cause injuries and can cause health problems if someone has that Mars, you know, so strategically placed. We will also see that it could affect just personal dynamics. You know, it involves his Venus, his moon, so there could be changes in his family. So keep, you know, keep our people safe. And you'll probably hear from him in one way or another, whether he's going to be campaigning, whether he's going to start something new and, like we say, reinvent himself as well. Something to look into. Interestingly, Mr. Dalai is also on the spot this season of around September to November, with his own Mars, where the full moon, where the new moon is going to be in Libra, square his Pluto. Now, the whole year, the Saturn-Pluto is conjunct his North Node, opposing his Pluto. He's at that age where he's getting a Pluto opposition, and it squares his Mars. So it will be interesting to see what happens for the Tibetan people. We can also anticipate him to be, on the one hand, very visible and possibly involved in campaigning and in, you know, being involved in this, in whatever's happening in the world. There could also be scandals, and there could also be power struggle within the local community. But we also have to be careful about his health. So whatever needs to be will be, but it's definitely a rite of passage. So that's, you know, reconstruction, reinventing yourself, new roads to be paved. It's a little bit of the terrain of this year. And things could get worse, you know, so be careful what you're doing with your hairdo. So to summarize where we're at, as I said earlier, we have about 7 months to go through this intense phase of reconstruction. The message to retain is that June is going to be a very important phase that then shifts around the 27th of June to a completely new energy. However, it is still a climate of volatility and change and insecurity. So we're still in that journey of transformation, but it's happening with you know, differently. It's not going to be passive. Think about the fact that all the way into 2020, whether we were in lockdown, it was a time where we had to retreat. We had to cancel things. We had to stay home, and we had to rethink about what our life is about, or what the government is doing, or, you know, how to stay healthy and put masks on and really be in a position of introversion. From July on, it's changing gears and we're moving into a more aggressive state. So it is a time of action where we need to not only retreat, but now act upon the things that we realized, act upon the things that we wish for. And as I said personally, what I've experienced in my practice is that many people feel inspired that this is the year where they need to make that change. And it's absolutely true. On the one hand, people feel financially more vulnerable, but it seems like it's a feeling of, I have nothing more to lose. If I don't do it now, when? And I encourage you to think that way, because as we move into that second part of the year from end of June, it's not time to wait and see. It's not time to play it safe. So if you want to ride this wave, that's the purpose of this video, is to understand what the year is about, so that you're not just caught in crossfires and you're not just confused at the middle of a crossroad, that you understand the intention here is for you to reinvent yourself. This is an opportunity for you to do things differently, to start a new project, to start a new life, to uproot and replant yourself somewhere else with someone else, maybe another job. It depends on where that is activated in your natal chart. But this is the time where the tables are turning, the iron is hot, and you can remold it and build new conditions, new direction for your life. We will see a lot of sparkling energy and fireworks and battles on the political level. We have to pray that peace is maintained and that these fires do not get out of control. Leaders will be in danger. They will be the target of a lot of aggression. they will respond with aggression. You know, that whole Mars square Saturn shows leaders in precarious positions. And when they are in precarious position, they act also quite forcefully. But if we trust that there is a purpose to all this, just like in your own life, there is a purpose to those risks, then you also understand that humanity is coming to a point where it cannot continue the way it has. The coronavirus has made people very, very vulnerable, like a karmic boomerang. Think about Boris Johnson in the UK, who was, you know, promoting Brexit and wanting to secure the borders, which is understandable on some level, but he contracted the virus, and then he is taken care of and healed by nurses and doctors born in foreign countries. That's the sign of the times, when there's a big mirror, you know, facing those leaders and facing us all, about the accountability, about the impact of our decision, and really coming, especially in trying time like this, when we don't have our safety cushion, you know, and can just be in a safe place. This is the time when our true colors come through, our courage, our hearts. You know, so many people speak about love. You know, it's easy to love people when everything's going well. When do you really show that this is your language? Is when there is a power struggle, and when you're facing people you don't agree with. So we are called to action, but we're also called to walk our talk. I would like to thank everybody for your attention, and I wish you all the best in this transition, in these times of historical changes. And may we emerge from this stronger, victorious, with a better world and greater understanding for each other. And I encourage you, as always, to consider studying astrology. It helped me, you know, it changed my life. It gave me direction. It gave me understanding about myself and why things happen the way they do. If many people, if leaders were listening to astrologers, maybe we would have avoided a lot of crisis and unnecessary difficult lessons. Remember, the lesson, you're going to learn the lesson. The question is, do you learn the hard way, or do you learn the supportive way? That's how astrology can help you. God bless. Thank you.